Ilara lived in a small wooden cottage at the edge of a great forest. She was not rich, nor was she powerful, but she had a kind heart and strong hands that worked the land every day. The villagers often called her strange, for she liked to wander into the woods alone, gathering herbs, berries, and roots that others were too afraid to search for. The forest was thick with secrets filled with strange sounds and shadows, and most people whispered warnings about what might hide beneath its trees. But Ilara was not afraid. She trusted her steps, and she trusted her heart. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in red and gold, Ilara went deeper into the forest than usual. She was looking for a rare flower that only bloomed after rain. The air smelled fresh and cool, and the ground was still damp. Birds fluttered overhead, and insects hummed in the fading light. Then, just as she bent down to check a patch of moss, she heard something unusual. It was a sound that did not belong to the forest, a faint cry, thin and sharp, almost like the whimper of a child or the squeak of a wounded animal. Ilara froze. Her heart beat faster. She turned her head, listening carefully. The sound came again, softer now. Like a broken plea for help, curiosity pulled her forward. She pushed through the underbrush, careful not to make too much noise. And after a few steps, she found the source there. Tangled in a nest of thorny brambles lay the smallest dragon she had ever seen. At first, she could hardly believe her eyes, for in the tales told by villagers, dragons were described as monstrous, with wings that blocked out the sun and teeth that could crush stone. But this creature was no larger than a farm dog. Its wings were torn and bloody, its scales dull and lifeless, and its body shivered weakly. Its eyes, once perhaps bright, now seemed dim and hopeless. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories of a dwarf dragon spotted near the mountains, but the villagers laughed at it, calling it useless, too weak to be a real dragon. They said it was a mistake of nature, doomed to die, and here it was, lying helpless, struggling against the sharp brambles that cut deeper into its skin each time it moved. The little dragon let out another cry. Not fierce, not threatening, but desperate. It tried to free itself, but its strength was gone. Ilara felt a rush of pity. She could walk away, pretend she had seen nothing. That would be safer. She knew that dragons, even the smallest ones, could be dangerous, and if the villagers discovered she had touched it, they would surely call her mad. They might even accuse her of bringing danger upon them all. But Ilara's heart would not allow her to turn back. She stepped closer, speaking softly. "Easy there, little one," she whispered, though she did not know if it could understand. Her voice was gentle, like the way she spoke to frightened lambs in the spring. She crouched low, examining the brambles. They were thick and cruel, wrapping tightly around the dragon's thin body and delicate wings. Every movement it made only dug the thorns deeper. Slowly, carefully, Ilara reached out. The dragon hissed weakly, its tiny claws scratching the air, but it was too weak to truly fight. Its eyes darted between fear and exhaustion. Ilara pulled a small knife from her belt. With steady hands, she began cutting the brambles away. She worked patiently, murmuring quiet words to calm the creature. "Almost free now, don't be afraid, I won't hurt you." Minutes passed like hours. The dragon whimpered whenever a thorn pulled at its scales, but Ilara never stopped. At last, with a final slice, the last of the brambles fell away. The dragon collapsed onto the ground, trembling. It did not run. It did not strike, it only lay there, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Ilara's eyes softened. She could see every rib beneath its thin skin, see the scars that marked its small frame. Whoever had mocked this creature as useless had never seen the courage it took just to survive this long. She knelt beside it, unsure of what to do next. She could leave it, but her heart already knew the answer. The dragon needed her just as she perhaps needed it. The forest grew darker as the sun slipped behind the hills. The shadows stretched long and the air grew cool. Ilara knew she could not leave the dragon there. Alone, it would not survive the night. With a deep breath, she slid her arms gently beneath its frail body. The dragon flinched at her touch but made no attempt to resist. It was too weak to fight, and maybe deep inside, it understood that she meant no harm. Lifting the small dragon, Ilara cradled it against her chest. Its body was warm but trembling. She could feel its tiny heartbeat against her arm. She whispered again, "You're safe now." The dragon gave a faint chirp, almost like a sigh before closing its eyes. As she carried it back through the forest, Ilara thought about what the villagers might say. They would laugh, they would scold, they would tell her she was foolish, but their words no longer mattered. What mattered was the fragile life in her arms, a life that others had given up on. Ilara did not see a useless creature. She saw a soul in need of care. By the time she reached her cottage, the stars had begun to shine. She laid the dragon on a bed of soft cloth near her hearth, watching as the firelight painted its scales in shades of gold. For the first time that day, Ilara allowed herself to smile. The little dragon had been found, and now maybe it had a chance to live. Ilara sat beside the small dragon as it lay near the hearth. The warmth of the fire made its weak body twitch, but at least it no longer shivered from the cold. She watched its chest rise and fall, each breath shallow and fragile, for a long moment. She wondered if it would even survive the night. Still, her heart told her to try. When dawn touched the sky, Ilara began her work. She filled a wooden bowl with clean water and mixed in crushed herbs she had gathered from the forest. The mixture smelled sharp but soothing. She dipped a cloth into it and carefully pressed the damp fabric against the dragon's wounded wings. The creature hissed faintly, its small body trembling under her hand. Ilara whispered softly, "I know it hurts, little one, but you'll be all right." Her voice carried patience, like a gentle song meant to calm frightened hearts. At first, the dragon resisted every touch. Its claws scraped weakly against the floor and its eyes darted with fear. It seemed to expect cruelty with every movement she made. Perhaps it remembered the villagers who mocked it, or perhaps it had lived its short life only knowing pain. Ilara sighed but did not give up. She moved slowly, letting it see her hands, letting it hear her soft words. She knew trust would not be won in a single moment. When she brought food, broth made from chicken and wild roots, the dragon turned its head away. Its pride, even in weakness, would not allow it to beg. Ilara set the bowl down anyway, whispering, "It will be here when you're ready." She returned to her work chopping vegetables for her own meal, pretending not to notice as the dragon's nose twitched at the smell. After a while, it crawled closer and lapped at the broth, pausing often to glance at her as if afraid she would snatch it away. Ilara smiled but kept her eyes on her knife, giving it the dignity of eating in peace. Days passed in this careful rhythm every morning. Ilara cleaned the wounds with her herbal salves. Every night she placed food and water near the hearth. At first the dragon refused her help, snapping and hissing when her hands drew near. But little by little it began to allow her touch. Sometimes it would even rest its head on the cloth while she worked. Its eyes half closed, weary but no longer filled with pure terror. The villagers soon noticed that Ilara visited the market less often. They wondered why she stayed in her cottage so much. A few who passed her home thought they heard strange noises. Whispers of wings and low growls. Rumors spread quickly. "She keeps a monster," one said. "She's cursed," said another, but Ilara did not care. She had made her choice the night she carried the dragon home. The rest of the world could call her foolish, but she knew kindness was never wasted. The dragon, still weak, began to show small signs of recovery. Its scales, once dull and gray, started to glimmer faintly in the light. Its wings, though still torn, stretched a little wider each day. It no longer cried out in pain during the night. Instead, it curled near the fire, breathing softly. Sometimes, when Ilara hummed a tune while working, its tail would twitch, as if the sound reached a hidden part of its heart. She decided to keep calling it useless, not because she believed it, but because she wanted to change the meaning of the word. "Names can carry power," she told it one evening, while stroking the rough scales of its neck. "If they mocked you with this name, then we will turn it into something better." The dragon blinked at her, its golden eyes reflecting the firelight for the first time. Ilara thought she saw a flicker of understanding. But caring for a dragon was no simple task. The creature grew restless, sometimes thrashing when nightmares seized it. Ilara often woke in the middle of the night to soothe it, placing her hand gently on its side, whispering calm words until the storm passed. There were mornings she felt exhausted, her hands aching from work, her mind heavy with doubt. Yet every time she looked at the dragon, lying alive where once it had been half dead, her spirit lifted again. One afternoon, when she returned from fetching water, she found Useless struggling near the window. Its wings flapped clumsily, stirring dust. It was trying to climb onto the ledge. Ilara rushed forward in fear that it might hurt itself, but the dragon hissed weakly. Demanding space, she paused, then stepped back, watching. It flapped again and managed to pull itself onto the ledge. For a moment, it lifted its head proudly, though its body shook with the effort. Then it collapsed back onto the floor. Panting, Alara hurried to comfort it, but her heart swelled with quiet joy. The spirit to fight was still alive within him. That night, as the fire glowed warm, Useless crept closer to Alara than ever before. It lay beside her chair, its head resting on the edge of her skirt. Alara looked down in surprise. She had not asked it to come, it had chosen slowly. She lowered her hand and brushed her fingers against its snout. This time it did not flinch, instead it let out a soft chirp, almost like a purr. Alara smiled, her eyes misting. "You're not useless at all," she whispered. Though the villagers doubted her, though the dragon's wounds had not fully healed, something had already begun to change. Between the woman and the small, broken creature, a fragile bond was forming, a bond born not from strength or power, but from patience, trust, and kindness. Days turned into weeks, and Alara's small cottage became the healing place for the little dragon. Each morning the sun would rise, spilling golden light across the wooden floor, and she would begin her quiet routine. She filled bowls with water, stirred warm broth, and ground herbs into paste. The air inside her cottage often smelled of mint and smoke, sometimes bitter, sometimes sweet, depending on the medicine she prepared. The dragon, still weak, did not trust easily when Alara approached. It often tucked its wings close to its body and bared its tiny teeth. Its golden eyes watched her every move, sharp with suspicion. But Alara never forced it. She spoke gently, her voice calm as the breeze outside, and she always moved slowly so it would not feel threatened. "Easy now, Useless," she would whisper. "I will not harm you at first." The dragon refused food from her hands. If she placed a bowl near it, it would wait until she turned her back before creeping forward to eat. Alara pretended not to notice, though her heart swelled every time she heard the faint sound of lapping broth. Little by little, the creature began to test its trust. Sometimes it allowed her to sit close while it ate. Other times it even looked up at her with eyes that seemed less afraid. The hardest task was tending to its wounds. The torn wings needed daily care. Alara would warm water over the fire and clean the scars with cloth. The dragon hissed at first, snapping weakly as if to tell her to stop. Yet she never pulled away. She only whispered, "I know it hurts, but this will help." Over time, the hissing softened into small whimpers, and then, astonishingly, into silence. The dragon no longer fought her touch one evening. While the rain tapped against the roof and the fire crackled low, Alara noticed something that made her heart flutter. As she dipped her fingers into the herb paste and touched the dragon's wing, it did not flinch away. Instead, its head lowered, eyes half closed, as if it had finally accepted her care. For Alara, that moment was as precious as any treasure. She smiled softly and whispered, "You're learning to trust me, aren't you?" Trust was slow, like a seed taking root in rocky soil, but it grew a little each day. Useless began to explore the cottage. His steps were clumsy, his tail knocking against chairs. His wings dragged on the floor, leaving faint marks in the dust. Alara did not mind. She laughed gently whenever he stumbled, and sometimes he even chirped in return, as if amused by his own awkwardness. Nights were still the hardest. Often the dragon woke suddenly, his small body trembling with fear. His sharp cries filled the darkness. Alara would rise from her bed, kneel beside him, and place her hand gently on his side. She whispered soothing words until his breathing slowed again. Sometimes he would curl into a tight ball beside the fire. Sometimes he pressed himself close to her leg. Seeking warmth and comfort, Alara never pushed him away. She knew his nightmares came from pain too deep for words. The villagers still spoke of her in hushed tones. Some claimed she was cursed. Others whispered she was foolish to waste her time on a dying beast. A few even suggested she should put the creature out of its misery. But Alara ignored them all. She saw what they could not see. She saw hope hidden beneath broken wings. She saw strength in each breath he took. Slowly, signs of healing appeared. His scales, once dull and gray, began to glimmer faintly like polished bronze when the firelight struck them. His eyes grew clearer, sharper, no longer clouded with pain. He even tried to stretch his wings, though they quivered and shook with effort. Alara encouraged him with soft claps and kind words. "That's it, Useless. Try again. You're stronger than you know." One morning, Alara was preparing food when she heard a soft noise behind her. She turned to see the dragon sitting upright. Staring at her with bright eyes, he let out a low, almost musical sound. Not a hiss, not a cry, but something in between. It felt like a greeting. Alara's heart lifted. She crouched down and answered with a smile. "Good morning, little one." The dragon blinked slowly, and for the first time it did not look away. Their bond deepened with small, simple acts. Sometimes when Alara worked in the garden, the dragon followed her outside, staying close to the cottage wall, afraid of the open sky. But each step on the grass was progress. Each glance upward a silent question of what the world might hold. Alara never pushed him beyond what he was ready for. She let him take each step at his own pace. One evening, as thunder rolled across the hills and rain poured heavy against the windows, Alara sat reading near the fire. Suddenly she felt a weight against her leg. She looked down and saw the dragon pressed tightly to her side, his eyes wide with fear at the storm. For a heartbeat, Alara did not move. Then she reached down, gently stroking his rough scales. "It's only thunder," she whispered. "You're safe here with me." Slowly, his trembling eased, his tail curled around her ankle, and he let out a small, tired chirp before resting his head. That night, Alara stayed awake for a long time, watching the firelight dance across his fragile wings. In her heart, she knew something important had begun. The dragon no longer saw her as a stranger, no longer as a threat, but as something closer to family. And though the world outside called him useless, within the walls of her cottage he was becoming something else entirely. A creature of hope, of quiet strength, a friend who was learning to trust again. One night, the wind howled across the forest and the rain poured down in heavy sheets. The trees outside bent under the storm, branches cracked, and lightning split the sky with sudden white flashes. Alara sat near the fire listening to the roar, her book forgotten on the table. She always disliked storms, but she had grown used to them. Yet this night was different, for beside her hearth lay the little dragon, useless, his body trembling with each clap of thunder. The first loud strike of lightning made him leap to his feet. His wings spread wide, though they were still weak, and his eyes darted wildly around the cottage. Searching for an escape, he let out a sharp cry, the sound more frightened than fierce. Alara's heart ached. She knelt beside him quickly, reaching out her hand. "It's all right, little one. You're safe here," she whispered, but the dragon hissed, his fear too strong to recognize her comfort. Another boom of thunder shook the windows, and Useless darted toward her, pressing his small body against her side. Alara froze for a moment, startled by the sudden closeness. Then she slowly placed her arm around him, letting him feel the steady warmth of her presence. She stroked his rough scales gently, whispering calm words. Her voice was soft, like a lullaby. "Shh, it's only noise, it can't hurt you. I'll keep you safe." To her surprise, the dragon did not pull away. He stayed close, trembling still, but his sharp eyes softened. His claws clutched lightly at the fabric of her dress, seeking security. Alara smiled faintly through the storm. She realized this was the first time he had chosen her touch. Not by accident, not in weakness, but because he needed her that night. Something fragile but strong grew between them. After that evening, Useless began to follow Alara more often. When she moved from the fire to the table, he waddled behind her. When she stepped outside to gather water, he hovered near the door until she returned. His movements were still clumsy, his wings dragging on the ground, yet his loyalty became clear. Alara laughed softly each time she turned to find him staring at her with those golden eyes. It was as if he feared she might disappear if he did not keep watch. During the days, Alara encouraged him to practice. Sometimes she set a stool near the window and guided him to climb onto it. "Come on, Useless, you can do this," she would say with a grin. The dragon tilted his head, suspicious at first, but he would clamber up with awkward hops. His wings twitched, flapped, and spread, though they often collapsed under his own weight. More than once he tumbled down with a squawk of frustration. Alara could not help but laugh, not cruelly but with warmth. "You'll get there, little one," she assured him. "Every fall brings you closer to flight." The dragon, despite his name, showed stubborn determination. After every stumble, he picked himself up, eyes narrowed with fiery resolve. He tried again and again, each time leaping higher, each time flapping harder. His failures were many, but his spirit grew stronger. Alara clapped for him after every attempt, her cheers filling the cottage. "That's my boy," she whispered one day, when he managed to hover in the air for a heartbeat before crashing onto the rug. In those moments, Alara discovered joy she had not known in years. Her lonely cottage, once filled only with the quiet crackle of fire and the rustle of pages, now rang with laughter and chirps. The dragon's clumsy flights, his sudden tumbles, his proud little growls, all of it made life brighter. She no longer felt like the strange woman living at the edge of the forest. She felt like someone chosen, someone with a purpose. One evening, after a long day of training and tending to chores, Alara sat on her chair near the hearth. Useless curled close by. His body rested against her boots, and his tail swished softly with contentment. She reached down, brushing her hand over his head. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes with a soft chirp. That simple act filled her chest with warmth. The creature that once feared every shadow now trusted her enough to rest in her presence. Outside, the storm had passed, the air was clear, and the stars shimmered brightly above the forest. Alara looked out the window for a moment, then back at the dragon. She whispered, "You're not useless, not at all, you're brave. And one day you'll fly as high as the eagles." The dragon let out a small, pleased rumble, as if he understood her words. From that night onward, Useless no longer kept his distance. He followed her like a shadow, climbed onto chairs beside her, and even perched awkwardly near the windowsill to watch the world outside. When thunder rolled again weeks later, he did not run to hide under blankets. Instead, he crept close to Alara's side, pressing against her calmly. The storm still frightened him, but now he had someone to face it with. The fragile bond they had formed in the storm grew into something unbreakable. It was no longer just a woman caring for a wounded creature. It was companionship, trust, and the beginning of a friendship that would shape both their lives. In his eyes, Alara was no longer a stranger. She was his safe place, his protector, and perhaps the first true friend he had ever known. The bond between Alara and the small dragon grew stronger each day, but outside the walls of her cottage, whispers spread like fire. Villagers who passed near the forest sometimes caught a glimpse of wings through the window, or heard strange chirps and growls in the night. At first they thought it was only rumor, but soon they began to believe. "She's keeping a beast," one man said at the well. "She's lost her mind," muttered an old woman. And so the story of Alara and her dragon spread through the village like a dark shadow. When Alara walked to the market to buy grain or salt, she felt the eyes of the people on her back. Children pointed and whispered while their mothers pulled them closer. A butcher once told her, "You should be careful. Woman, a dragon, no matter how small, will turn on you." Alara only gave a polite smile and carried her basket home. She did not bother to explain, for how could they understand what she saw when she looked at Useless? One evening, a group of villagers came to her cottage. They stood outside her door with torches in their hands, not to attack, but to show their disapproval. Their leader, a tall man with a sharp voice, shouted, "Alara, we know what you are hiding. We will not have a dragon living so close to our homes. If it grows, it will burn our fields. If it hungers, it will eat our children. End this madness before it brings ruin on us all." Alara opened the door slowly. The firelight from their torches flickered across her face, calm but firm. "This creature is not what you think," she told them softly. "He is small, broken, and he means no harm. He is no monster. He only needs kindness," but the villagers scoffed. Some spat on the ground, others shook their heads. "Foolish woman," one said. "When your cottage is ash, you'll regret it." The crowd left with grumbles and curses, but their words stung Alara's heart. She closed the door and leaned against it. Her hands trembled, and for a brief moment, she wondered if they were right. What if Useless did become dangerous? What if she was only fooling herself? Her gaze turned toward the hearth, where the small dragon lay curled up, breathing softly in his sleep. His wings twitched as though he dreamed of flying. His small body glowed with the light of the fire. At that sight, her doubts melted. She knew what her heart had already decided. He was not a threat, he was family. The days after that grew more difficult. Villagers avoided her when she came to town. Friends she once shared bread with now turned away. A baker who had always greeted her kindly refused to meet her eyes. "A woman who sides with monsters will have no blessing from me," he muttered as she left his shop. Alara walked home with her basket half empty, her chest heavy. Yet when she stepped inside and saw Useless hop clumsily toward her with a cheerful chirp, her sadness lifted. His joy was simple, pure, and it reminded her why she chose him. Useless seemed to sense her troubles when she sat quietly, staring at the fire with worry clouding her mind. He often climbed into her lap without warning, his warm body pressed against her, his tail curling around her wrist. He would tilt his head and chirp softly as though to tell her, "I am here." Alara stroked his rough scales, smiling through her weariness. "You are worth every whisper." "Little one," she said gently, "let them laugh. I know the truth." One afternoon, As Ilara carried water from the stream, she heard two boys talking nearby. They say the dragon can't even fly. It's useless, just like its name, one sneered. The other laughed. Maybe she keeps it because she's just as useless as it is. The words cut like sharp knives. Ilara clenched her fists but said nothing. She walked past them with steady steps, refusing to let their cruelty see her tears that evening. She told Useless the story of what she heard. Her voice cracked with sadness as she said, "They think you're nothing." "They think I'm nothing too." The dragon tilted his head, listening. Then he climbed onto her shoulder with surprising determination. His claws clung tightly to her tunic, and he puffed out his small chest, letting out a proud growl. Ilara laughed through her tears. "Yes, maybe we are nothing to them, but together, we are something." As the weeks rolled on, the ridicule did not stop. Yet Ilara grew stronger in the face of it. She chose to keep to herself, tending her garden, caring for her animals, and most of all, helping Useless grow. He practiced spreading his wings in the open clearing, stumbling often, falling sometimes, but rising again each time. Ilara clapped for him, cheered for him, and gave him the courage the villagers never would. One day, after another long attempt at flapping and leaping, Useless collapsed on the grass, panting heavily. Ilara hurried to him, wiping the sweat-like sheen from his scales. "You are not useless," she whispered fiercely, holding him close. "You are the bravest soul I have ever known." The dragon chirped weakly, but his eyes shone with a golden light, as if her words had reached a place deep within him. Though the villagers still mocked, Ilara no longer let their voices shape her heart. Each laugh, each insult was answered not with anger, but with the simple truth she lived each day. In her eyes, Useless was not a burden. He was proof that even the weakest creature, given care and trust, could rise again. She carried that belief like a flame inside her, glowing brighter than any torch the villagers held against her. And while the world outside called them foolish and doomed, inside the small cottage at the forest's edge, a woman and her dragon built a bond that no rumor, no whisper, and no scorn could ever break. The morning was clear, the kind of morning that filled the forest with golden light. Birds sang high in the trees, and the cool air smelled of grass and earth. Ilara stood in the small clearing near her cottage, watching as Useless clambered onto a large rock. His claws scraped against the stone, his wings twitching nervously at his sides. He had grown stronger in the weeks past, no longer the weak, broken creature she had found. His scales gleamed with a faint bronze shine, and his eyes carried fire instead of fear. Ilara folded her arms, smiling with encouragement. "You can do it." "Little one," she said softly. Useless gave a small growl in reply, as if to tell her he was ready. He spread his wings, stretching them wide. They were still smaller than a full dragon's wings, but they caught the sunlight beautifully. His tail swished with nervous energy. His body trembled, not from weakness now, but from anticipation. For many days he had practiced flapping, jumping, even hovering for brief moments before crashing down. Each failure had been followed by Ilara's gentle claps and cheers. "Again, Useless, you're closer every time," she would say. He had grown braver with each attempt, but still, he had not truly flown. Today felt different. The air seemed lighter. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Ilara herself felt a strange hope rise in her chest. Useless crouched low, wings quivering, his eyes fixed on the open space before him. He gave a sharp chirp, almost like a battle cry, then leapt forward from the rock for one heart-stopping moment. He dropped straight down. Ilara gasped, her hands rising to her mouth. But then, with desperate strength, his wings caught the wind. They flapped hard, awkward but determined. The air lifted him, not high, but enough to keep him from the ground. Ilara's heart soared as she watched him glide clumsily forward. His body wobbled, his tail flailed, but he was no longer falling. He was flying. The moment lasted only seconds, for his wings faltered, and he tumbled onto the grass with a soft thud. Yet instead of crying out in pain, Useless chirped loudly. His eyes glowing with fierce joy, he bounced to his feet, puffing out his chest as though he had conquered the skies themselves. Ilara laughed, tears welling in her eyes. She clapped her hands with all her strength. "You did it, Useless, you flew," she cried. Her voice cracked with pride. The little dragon chirped again, pacing proudly in circles. Showing off his wings, his steps were unsteady, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. He climbed the rock again, more confident this time. Ilara rushed forward. "Careful, don't push yourself too much," she warned. But her words were lost in the dragon's determination. He leapt once more, wings beating with all his might. Again the air carried him, this time a little farther. A little smoother, he hovered for a breath, wobbling like a leaf in the wind. Before landing roughly in the grass, he looked up at Alara, chirping expectantly. Waiting for her applause, she laughed again, clapping until her hands stung. Yes, yes, my brave one. You are no longer useless at all. The days after that became filled with practice. Every morning Useless climbed the rock and launched himself into the air. Each time he flew a little farther, stayed up a little longer. His crashes were still clumsy, but they no longer seemed like failures. They were stepping stones toward something greater. Alara encouraged him through every stumble. Her voice became his anchor. Up again, little one. You are stronger than yesterday, sometimes. When he fell hard, he would limp back to her with a low whine. Alara always knelt to comfort him, stroking his scales gently. It's all right. Even the sky must wait for you, but you will conquer it, she whispered. And each time, after a few moments of rest, Useless would crawl back to the rock, ready to leap again. His determination seemed endless one afternoon. While the sun was high and the forest was alive with sound, Useless climbed the rock once more, his wings spread wide. Stronger now, Alara stood nearby, her breath held. He crouched low, his eyes bright with fierce focus. Then he leapt. His wings caught the air with greater strength than before. This time he did not just glide, he lifted higher than ever. His small body rose above Alara's head. His wings beat clumsily but steadily. He hovered for several long breaths, his shadow flickering across the grass. Alara gasped, joy bursting from her chest. You're flying, truly flying, she shouted. Her eyes blurred with tears, the dragon chirped loudly in triumph. His wings wobbled and he dipped, but he stayed aloft for a few more heartbeats before finally landing with a soft tumble. He rolled onto his side, panting, yet his eyes glowed with pure pride. Alara rushed to him, scooping him gently into her arms. She held him close, laughing and crying at once. You've done it, my little one. You've shown them all you're not useless. You're the bravest creature alive. The dragon nuzzled against her neck, his body trembling not with fear, but with the thrill of victory. That night, when the stars filled the sky and the forest lay quiet, Useless curled beside Alara as he always did. But this time his wings rested differently, as though they carried new strength. Alara stroked his head, whispering softly, One day, you will soar higher than the treetops, higher than the mountains. You will show the world that you were never what they called you. The dragon let out a soft, contented chirp, his golden eyes closing slowly. Though his first flight had been clumsy and short, it was more than a beginning. It was a promise of what was to come. A broken creature had touched the sky, and in that moment, neither Alara nor Useless felt small. They felt endless, like the sky itself belonged to them. The forest was peaceful on that evening, the sun sinking low and painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Alara walked along a narrow path with a basket in her arms, gathering herbs and roots before the light faded. Useless followed close behind, his wings fluttering nervously whenever the wind rustled the leaves. Though he had grown braver since his first flight, the forest still held shadows that unsettled him. Alara often looked back and smiled. Stay close, little one, you're safe with me, she said. But safety is not always promised from deep within the trees. A sound echoed low and rumbling. It was not the call of a bird or the rustle of a deer. It was a growl, heavy and dangerous. Alara froze. Her heart quickening, she knew that sound. The villagers had spoken of a dire wolf, a monstrous beast larger than a man, that had been stalking their flocks at night. Now the growl came again, closer, sharper. The hairs on Alara's neck rose. From the shadows stepped the creature. Its fur was dark and matted, its eyes gleamed yellow with hunger. Its teeth bared in a snarl. It was far larger than any wolf Alara had ever seen. Her breath caught in her throat as the basket slipped from her hands, spilling herbs onto the ground. The dire wolf lowered its body, ready to spring, its gaze fixed on her like she was already its prey. Useless chirped sharply, his wings flaring wide, though his body trembled. He was no match for such a beast, his small frame dwarfed by the wolf's bulk. Alara raised her hand slowly, stepping back. Her voice shook as she whispered, Stay calm, Useless, don't anger it. We'll find a way. But the dire wolf had no patience for waiting. It lunged forward with terrifying speed. Alara stumbled, falling back against the ground. The beast loomed above her, its teeth glinting. In that instant, she thought it was the end. But before the wolf could strike, a flash of bronze scales darted in front of her. Useless threw himself between Alara and the beast, his wings spreading as wide as they could, his tiny chest puffed up, his eyes blazing with a courage Alara had never seen before. The wolf snarled and snapped its massive jaws. Useless hissed back, his body quivering yet firm. Then something incredible happened. From deep within his throat came a sound, a rumble, raw and powerful. He opened his mouth, and with sudden force, a small burst of fire shot out. It was not large, not like the fire of the great dragons and legends, but it was enough. The flames licked across the wolf's fur, singeing it. The beast yelped in shock and stumbled back. Alara's eyes widened, her breath stolen by the sight. Useless, who had once been mocked as weak and useless, had breathed fire. The wolf growled again, but now it hesitated. Its eyes flicked between the determined little dragon and the woman behind him. Useless hissed once more, fire sparking at the edges of his mouth. His wings beat the air, making him appear larger than he was. The dire wolf snarled one last time, but its courage faltered. With a shake of its singed fur, it turned and vanished back into the trees. Its heavy steps fading into the distance, the forest grew silent again. Except for the sound of Alara's racing heartbeat, for a long moment Alara lay frozen on the ground, her eyes locked on the small figure standing before her. Useless stood tall, or as tall as he could, his wings spread, his chest heaving, his body trembled with exhaustion, but his eyes glowed fiercely. He turned his head toward her, chirping softly as if to ask, "Are you safe?" Alara's eyes filled with tears. She scrambled to her knees and gathered him into her arms. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "My brave little one, you saved me." She held him close, feeling the warmth of his body, the faint heat still lingering in his throat from the fire. Useless chirped again, this time tired but proud. He nestled into her embrace. When they returned to the village the next day, the story had already spread. Some villagers had heard the wolf's cry in the distance. Others saw the scorched marks left on the trees. When Alara told them what had happened, few believed her at first. "That small thing breathed fire," one man scoffed. But others looked at her with wide eyes, whispering to each other. They had mocked the dragon as useless, yet he had faced the dire wolf and won. Children peered curiously from behind their mothers' skirts, pointing at the small dragon perched on Alara's shoulder. Useless puffed out his chest proudly, letting out a sharp chirp, as though declaring his victory to the world. For the first time no one laughed. Some even bowed their heads in quiet respect. That night, back in her cottage, Alara sat by the fire with Useless curled in her lap. She stroked his scales gently, whispering, "You are no monster, no curse, no mistake. You are my joy, my protector, my little dragon with the heart of a lion." Useless gave a soft rumble, closing his eyes with contentment. Though the world had once named him useless, in that single act of courage he had proved them all wrong. He was no longer just a broken creature struggling to survive. He was a guardian, a friend, a spark of fire in the dark, and for Alara, he was everything she had ever hoped to find. The days after the dire wolf attack changed everything. Alara noticed it first in the way the villagers looked at her. No longer did they stare with scorn or whisper behind her back. Now their eyes followed Useless with something new, not laughter but respect. The little dragon who once hid under blankets and trembled at storms had stood against a beast that no man dared fight. He had shown fire, and the fire had silenced their doubt. When Alara walked to the market now, children would run beside her. "Is it true your dragon breathed fire?" they asked. Wide-eyed with wonder, Useless puffed his chest proudly, flapping his wings with a chirp that made the children laugh. Some even reached out shyly to touch his scales. Alara allowed it, smiling as she watched the fear of the villagers turn into curiosity. The same people who once called him useless now whispered another word: protector. But though the respect of others felt sweet, Alara's joy came from something deeper. Every day she saw Useless grow stronger. His wings, once torn and weak, now stretched wider, catching the sunlight like sheets of bronze. He still stumbled sometimes, but each fall ended with a determined rise. He practiced in the clearing, leaping from his favorite rock and soaring a little higher with each attempt. Alara cheered for him always, her laughter ringing through the trees. One morning, as the mist lifted from the forest, Useless climbed the rock again. This time he did not look back for Alara's approval. He spread his wings, crouched low, and leapt into the air. The wind caught him, and he rose higher than ever before, higher than the treetops, higher than the roof of the cottage. His body wobbled, but his wings carried him steady. For a long moment he soared above the forest, his shadow dancing across the ground. Ilara stood below, her hands over her heart, tears filling her eyes. "You've done it. Little one," she whispered. "You belong to the sky now." Useless circled clumsily before landing with a proud chirp. His golden eyes glowed with joy. He bounded toward Ilara. Bumping his head against her chest, she laughed and held him close. "You are pure joy with wings," she said softly. "You've turned every cruel word into light." As the weeks passed, Useless became more than Ilara's companion. He became part of the forest, part of the village's story. Farmers smiled when they saw him flying above the fields. Children chased his shadow as it danced on the grass. Even the elders, once so fearful, nodded with quiet respect. For though he was small, his courage was large enough to change hearts. Ilara still remembered the night she found him tangled in brambles. Weak and broken, she thought of the villagers who had called him a mistake, a creature doomed to die. And she thought of the moment he had stood between her and the dire wolf. Fire blazing from his throat, she marveled at how far he had come, from hopelessness to hero, from useless to beloved. Useless never lost his playful spirit. Sometimes he tumbled into the cottage with muddy claws, knocking over baskets. Other times he landed on the roof and refused to come down, chirping proudly at his new perch. Ilara would shake her head with laughter. "You are a troublemaker, but you are mine," she would say. The dragon would tilt his head and give a cheeky growl, as though he understood. At night, when the stars shimmered above, Useless often perched on the windowsill, his wings tucked close as he gazed at the sky. Ilara watched him quietly, her heart swelling with pride. She knew one day his wings might carry him farther than the forest, perhaps beyond the mountains, but she also knew he would always return. For their bond was more than chance. It was family. The villagers, once doubtful, began to see lessons in his story. Parents told their children, "Do not judge by size or by weakness, for even the smallest creature may hold the greatest strength." They no longer called him Useless, but Ilara kept the name, for to her, it no longer meant weakness, it meant victory. Courage and love. Seasons changed. The forest bloomed in spring, glowed in summer, and turned golden in autumn. Through it all, Useless grew, not into a giant beast, but into something even greater, a symbol of hope. His wings carved paths through the sky. His chirps filled the air with laughter, and his fire reminded everyone that even the smallest spark could light the darkest night. Ilara often sat by her hearth, watching him sleep peacefully. His body curled like a bronze flame. She whispered softly, "The world tried to name you broken, but you showed them joy. You showed them life." She stroked his scales gently, feeling the warmth beneath. Useless stirred and nestled closer, his golden eyes half opening just long enough to glance at her with quiet trust. In the end, the woman and the dwarf dragon were no longer seen as strange or foolish. They were seen as a story, a living tale of courage, compassion, and transformation. The bond they shared became a light for others, a reminder that kindness could heal, and that love could turn weakness into strength. And so, the human woman who once rescued a broken little dragon found herself rescued too. Rescued from loneliness, from doubt, from the weight of being misunderstood. Together, they became more than a woman and a dragon. They became a legend whispered by firesides, a tale told with wonder, a proof that even the smallest wings can carry joy across the sky.